So we know that truth exists. The next question is, does God exist? And we promise we're going to show you 3 arguments in a very brief format for this God. And there's nobody better in Kearney, Nebraska, to show you these 3 arguments than my friend, Dr., by the way, just got his PhD, Dr. Tim Stratton here, ladies and gentlemen, of freethinkingministries.com. Write that down if you would, freethinkingministries.com, because this man is a great resource for you if you live in Kearney. He lives here, his family's here, and so he's going to do the God section here. So here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the great Tim Stratton.
Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you everybody for coming out here tonight.
Get that.
Oh yeah, you can have that water. Just a second here. So anyway, Frank, it's an honor to share the stage with you tonight, or the front of the room, I guess, right here in my alma mater, UNK. So here's the question. Does God exist? I got an answer for you. Yes. At least according to the evidence, the answer is yes. The eminent philosopher, Alvin Plantinga, has noted that there are many good reasons and fantastic arguments, even arguments supported by scientific data, that show that God exists. Plantinga has said there's a couple dozen arguments or so that show that God exists. We're going to look at 3 of these arguments tonight. The first one has to do with the beginning. It's called the cosmological argument. It basically comes down to this, that if there's a beginning, then there's a beginner. The next argument is from design, and it's also known as the teleological argument. Teleological is from the Greek word telos. It means purpose or design. And it basically comes down to this. If the universe is designed, then there's a designer of the universe. Now these 2 arguments are really cool that we're going to look at because they are supported by scientific data. So right off the bat, I want you to see that science doesn't support atheism, contrary to popular opinion. Science supports theism, and we're going to show you why. Now, the next argument isn't supported by scientific data, but it might be the most powerful argument out there because it deals with morality, or the moral argument. And it really boils down to this. If there's even only one thing that's really wrong, no matter what anybody thinks, well, then God exists. And here's why. If morality is more than just your opinion versus Hitler's opinion, or your opinion versus Obama's opinion, or Trump's opinion, or your opinion versus Frank Turek's opinion, or Tim Stratton's opinion. If morality is more than just personal opinions, then God exists. In fact, this is what grounds the law above the law that Chief Justice Jackson appealed to convict the Nazis in the Nuremberg trials. The law above the law only makes sense if God exists, if there's an ultimate standard that transcends human opinion, a standard from which our laws must approximate, at least if they are good laws in an objective sense. And if that's the case, if there are some laws that ought to be changed, if there are some things that are really wrong, then God exists. Now we're going to get back to the issue of morality shortly, but let's first begin with the beginning. Did you see that? Let's watch God move again. Have you ever seen God move? I mean, if anything happens tonight, you can go tell your friends, I was on the UNK campus and I saw God move in a powerful way. All right, thanks for laughing. All right, we're going to talk about the beginning of the universe. Now, this is an argument for the existence of God that seems to go back to the beginning, the Big Bang. Right, the Big Bang. Isn't that cool? Now think about it. Okay, now I see some Christians out here. I know some of you guys. And I see some people going, wait, Tim, you're going to talk about the Big Bang? We're Christians. We hate the Big Bang. We're opposed to the Big Bang, right? We can't talk about the Big Bang. Now listen. See, I contend that if a Christian rejects the Big Bang, then they're ultimately stealing defeat from the jaws of victory. I'm not opposed to the Big Bang. I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. You know, The evidence of the Big Bang is so good that even atheists and agnostic scientists affirm it. Take a look at what the late Stephen Hawking had to say about this. He says, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Well, if you think about that, if the universe had a beginning and even time itself, then this means that all space, time, and matter, all nature, literally came from nothing. Who studies nature for a living? Scientists. So all scientifically testable and discoverable stuff began to exist. Think about that. You know, Alexander Vilenkin, one of the world's leading cosmologists. This guy is scary smart. And he had this to say. He spoke at Stephen Hawking's cosmology conference not too long ago. Let's take a look at what Alexander Vilenkin says. He says, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now I want to focus on two words here in what Vilenkin says. Typically, scientists don't like to use the word proof. The scientist isn't in the business of proving things typically. They are in the business of disproving things and reaching the inference to the best explanation and things like that. But Alexander Vilenkin believes that there's so many converging lines of evidence that he's confident enough, this scientist is confident enough to say there is a proof to the beginning of all nature. Now, why is this a problem? Why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because if all nature had a, quote, mother of all beginnings, as his atheist colleague Alan Guth has said, that there was a mother of all beginnings. Well, if all nature had a mother of all beginnings, then this so-called mother must be something other than nature. And that's what philosophers call supernatural. Something other than nature simply means supernatural. Now, Vilenkin is an agnostic, but he admits the data for the first miracle. And by miracle, here we mean a supernatural event. But here's the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. So you got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, that's the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing. That's the theistic view. Now, which view seems more reasonable? Just asking a question here. What view seems more reasonable? What is the inference to the best explanation? Now, it's vital to point out here that virtually everybody is affirming that at least one miracle has occurred. At least one supernatural event has occurred. The atheist believes in a miracle without a miracle maker. And I got to tell you, I agree with Frank. I simply don't have that kind of faith. Now, Christians believe that someone created something out of nothing. Atheists believe that no one created something out of nothing. And by the way, everybody takes the law of causality seriously. What is the law of causality? It boils down to this, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. When I was explaining this to my son when he was in middle school, I explained it this way. I said, everything that's got a birthday has parents. Right? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now remember what Alan Guth affirmed about the universe. If everything that has a birthday has parents, well, Alan Guth, the atheist cosmologist, by the way, affirmed that there was a mother of all beginnings. So what could have been the parents, so to speak, of the universe if the universe began to exist? Well, it could not have been something that depends upon the universe. If something depends upon the universe for its existence, it cannot be the cause of the universe. So it's got to be something other than the universe, other than nature. And Aristotle realized this back before the time of Christ and realized, based upon logic alone, that there had to be an unmoved mover. So question, what's this unmoved mover like? That's the question that we got to answer tonight. What could have caused space, matter, and time, all nature, to have a birthday? Well, let's think about this logically. We're just going to think logically about this scientific data. That's all we're doing. Well, let's think about this. So if all nature had a birthday, if all nature began to exist, what could the cause of all nature be? Well, whatever it is, it's supernatural, other than nature. So just by thinking logically about scientific data, we can see that the atheistic, naturalistic worldview is taken off the table. It's over, done, right? Naturalism is not an option. So the cause of the universe has to be supernatural, just thinking logically about scientific data. Well, if space began to exist, we know that the cause of all space had to be spaceless. Because the cause of all space, could not exist in space before creating all space. That's logically incoherent. And we want to be rational. Right? So the cause of all space has to be spaceless. And did you know that matter can't exist without space? If there is no space, there is no matter. So guess what? The cause of all matter and space also has to be immaterial. An immaterial substance. Call that spirit if you'd like, but if you don't like that word for some emotional reason, just call it immaterial. It was an immaterial cause of the universe. It also had to be eternal, without beginning. Because of time began to exist. The space-time universe began to exist. Then we know whatever caused time had to exist apart from time, and therefore did not have a beginning, because beginnings require time. And so it was eternal without beginning. And that also means nothing caused it. So whatever this is, I'm not jumping to any conclusions here. Whatever it is that caused the universe, nothing caused it. It just exists. We also know that whatever it is, it's got to be extremely powerful, because I can't think of anything that requires more power than causing an entire universe to come into existence from nothing. Can you? I've thought about that long and hard and lost lots of sleep over that question. I can't think of anything that would require more power. And here's something that's cool. Whatever it is, it's got to be a volitional mind. By volitional, I mean this thing, whatever it is, has free will. How to reach that conclusion? Well, consider the words of the Greek physicist Fontini Markopoulou. She stated, apart from time, things don't happen. And we've realized that that time began to exist. So there was a timeless state. And she states that apart from time, things don't happen. She's exactly right. Unless, there's a big unless here, unless in that timeless state, a personal mind with free will exists apart from time, where the clock is not ticking, and then can make a free will and volitional choice to make the clock start ticking. I just saw some of your heads go. It's pretty cool, but it will blow your mind when you think about that. But here's the point. Simply by thinking logically about scientific data, we can see that a supernatural, eternal, extremely powerful, and personal being. Why is it a personal being? Because only persons have free will. Only persons are the types of things with volitional minds who can make choices. So we see whatever it is that caused the universe, it's a personal being. An extremely powerful, supernatural, eternal, personal being who is the cause and creator of the universe. Do I have any Bibles or religious books up here? None. On purpose. Think, oh, you're such a bad Christian. Well, I wanted to make a point. I have not touched a single Bible verse or referenced any passage of Scripture, since there are no Bible verses. Right, Frank? No Bible? Okay. But I haven't touched Scripture to make my point. I've just touched scientific data, and we've thought logically about it. Now, I hope you see that. But with that said, what does the supernatural, eternal person sound like? God. Thank you. It sounds like God. Now, have we demonstrated that this is the God of the Bible? No, we haven't. Not yet. Stick around. More data is required if we hope to reach that conclusion. However, it's vital to note that simply by thinking logically about science, several worldviews are taken off the table as possible explanations of reality. Atheism and naturalism, it's done. Naturalism cannot be true. The view that only nature exists, the view that only scientifically testable stuff exists, it's done. Take it off the table. What else can we rule out? Mormonism. We can rule out Mormonism by thinking logically about science. Why? Well, according to Mormonism, the universe exists eternally without beginning. They say that there is no beginning to the universe, and actually, humans are then contingent upon the universe, and then humans become gods with little g's, not big G's. Right? There's no big G God that created the universe on Mormonism. There's a whole bunch of many gods like Zeus and Thor, like in the Avengers, right? But you don't get a big G God, creator of the universe. So we can rule out Zeus, we can rule out Thor, we can even rule out the flying spaghetti monster. Why is that? Because spaghetti is contingent upon the material universe. Spaghetti is contingent upon carbs. And if there is no universe, there's no carbs. So the flying spaghetti monster cannot have created the universe. You can rule that out. We can know some things. There's around 4,000 or so worldviews from which to choose that have existed on this planet. And we can get rid of the vast majority of them with just this argument, leaving around 4 of the major worldviews to consider. So what are we left with? Basically only 4 options. Here's my final 4. Islam might be true. Based on what we've looked at and thinking logically about science, Islam could be true. Judaism, the Jewish religion, it's a possibility. It's a contender. Deism, the view that there was a creator of the universe and then he left and doesn't interact with the universe anymore, possibility. But also Christian theism. Christianity is a possible explanation of reality. So let me quickly point out something, a little side note here, that 3 of these 4 options reject the historical resurrection. And one of them says there is a historical resurrection. So, if there is historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, there's one victor. There's one remaining of those final 4. There is one left. And that would be Christianity. If there is historical evidence for the resurrection, stick around, we'll see if there is. Let's get back to discussing cosmology. I've got a question for atheists. If there is no God, then why is there something rather than nothing? Well, speaking of this something that exists, here's another question. Why is it fine-tuned for life? Why is it fine-tuned for life? Let's move to the teleological argument now, which is all about design and the fine-tuning of the universe. Remember that Big Bang that we were just discussing? Remember the Big Bang? If you're a Christian, it's your friend, right? The Big Bang. Well, scientists have discovered something about the Big Bang recently. I was on Facebook promoting this event the other day, and somebody wrote, "Oh, you're telling me there's new evidence for God's existence?" Well, yeah, kind of. This is recent discoveries from scientists, and they've found out that the initial condition of the beginning of all nature had to be just right, fine-tuned, on a razor's edge for life to exist anywhere in the universe. In fact, just for the universe to exist. But for life to exist anywhere. That is to say, the Big Bang, if the Big Bang didn't explode, if you will, in just the right way, then life would not exist just on Earth, but anywhere. So if one believes in evolution or not, it's irrelevant. If the initial conditions of the Big Bang were not incomprehensibly fine-tuned, then evolution could not occur anywhere in the entire universe, even here on Earth. You see, we're discussing extreme precision at the beginning. Now there's around a dozen or so of these precise values that have to be just right for the universe to exist and for life to exist anywhere in the universe. But let's just look at two. Let's look at Stephen Hawking again and see what he had to say. He says, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. Let that sink in. And now let's look at what else is said here. If the gravitational force were altered more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, then stars would not exist, and therefore neither would we. So to get an idea of how incomprehensible this is, imagine having a special tape measure. You could probably get this at Builders or Menards, I think. And this tape measure, it's really big. You can stretch it out across the entire known universe. All right, thought experiment. Imagine one that is stretched out across the entire known universe. Now what I want you to do is just pick any inch on that gigantic tape measure, just any given inch. And that little inch is going to represent this gravitational force. Now if that inch is moved slightly, just 1 inch over to the right or to the left, disaster. You're dead. You don't exist. The universe doesn't even exist. Say goodbye to life. Think about that. There's around a dozen or so of these tape measures that represent different values that have to be just right for the universe to exist and for human life to exist, or for any life to exist anywhere. So with that, we've got two options. The values were designed or they weren't. What's more reasonable? Atheists have to appeal to chance. Man, I gotta agree with Frank. I simply don't have that kind of faith. Well, let me get back to the third piece of evidence for the existence of God. I told you that we'd get back to morality, so let's do it. Now, first of all, before I do that, I want to point out that Frank and I agree that if atheism is true, then morality is impossible. In an objective sense, it's impossible. Frank and I also agree that if atheism is true, then rationality is impossible. Rationality, it doesn't work. And when you think about it, rationality and morality are linked. Consider C.S. Lewis, a former atheist. Let's look at this, a couple slides here. He says, suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought. So I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. I got to tell you that this idea behind what C.S. Lewis is saying here, it was the focus of my master's thesis and also a focus of my PhD dissertation. This topic gets me out of bed in the morning. I love talking about rationality and what it means to be rational and how rationality makes sense. But basically, this comes down to one question. What does it mean to be a free thinker? What's it mean to be a free thinker? You know, atheists love to call themselves free thinkers. Have you ever heard that? How many know that atheists like to call themselves free thinkers? All right, you've heard that, okay? But according to their own worldview, free will does not exist. They believe all that exists is only nature, and thus all that exists would be caused and determined by the forces of nature, just physics and chemistry, fizzing and popping and doing its thing. It stands to reason then that if this atheistic naturalism is true, then free will does not exist. Sam Harris is one of the most famous, most influential atheists in the world today. And Sam Harris wrote a book about free will called Free Will. And he concludes that we don't have free will. Listen to what he says. Listen to what he says about thoughts. Sam Harris. Thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes over which we are unaware and over which we exert no conscious control. What? And then he says, we do not have the freedom we think we have. And he goes on to say that we're not even responsible for our own thoughts. Here's the bottom line. If there's no free will, there's no free thinking. It doesn't make sense on atheism to say you're a free thinker. To make my point, I want to invite a mad scientist to the front of the room to engage in a little thought experiment. All right, not a real guy's coming up, but do a thought experiment with me. Imagine somehow that a mad scientist gets control of your brain. And now he causally determines everything in your head. So everything you think of and about, he causally determines, he forces this upon you. He causes you to think exactly what you think of and about and exactly how you think of and about it. He even causes the next words that are going to come out of your mouth. Question: how can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm any of your thoughts or beliefs? Go. Well, what? That was even the mad scientist, not you. All right. I'm just kidding. See, it's impossible. You're right. It's impossible to do such a thing. It doesn't work. And if you replace the mad scientist with physics and chemistry or anything else, you've got the exact same rationality problems, but for different reasons. It's impossible. However, if God exists, if theism is true, especially if Christian theism is true, then you are an image bearer with free will. Remember that cosmological argument that we just looked at. After thinking logically about scientific data, we reach the conclusion that God is an immaterial, volitional mind with free will, that is, an immaterial thinking thing, a free thinking thing. So if the Bible is right and you are a soul in the image of God that has a body, but who can survive the death of your body, then you are an immaterial mind who is free from the deterministic forces of nature to think and reason and reach rational conclusions. It's important to see that if Christianity is true, it's truly possible to be a free thinker. On atheism, not so much. Christians are the ones who have the right to be called free thinkers, and that's exactly why I called our ministry Freethinking Ministries. I stole it back from the atheists because they don't have rights to that term. All right, let's talk about morality. Now that we've discussed rationality, it's time to get to morality because they're linked. All right, this might be the most powerful argument for the existence of God because everyone has opinions on how they ought to be treated by other people. Everybody makes moral judgments every single day about what is good, bad, right, wrong, fair, or evil. Everybody has opinions. So let's do another thought experiment to make a point. Let's imagine that you go on a hike, it gets dark, you're in the forest, you get completely turned around, you have no idea which direction is north, south, east, or west, you have no clue. You pick up your cell phone and you realize it's dead and you are lost. You have no idea where you're going. But then you're like, oh, wait a second, I packed a magnetic compass in my backpack, I'll just get that out. So you get that out. You know you have to go north, and you're like, hey, this compass is going to point north. So you look at the compass, and you're like, oh, it's pointing right at me. So you figure you're looking south, and then you turn around, and you're like, wait, it still points at me. Whatever direction I'm turning, it's pointing at me. Question: is that compass any good? It's worthless, right? It's not helpful at all. So here's a bigger question. Is there an objective moral compass? Is there a right way to live? Or do you just get to live however the heck you want? Is it up to you? Or is there a true north regarding morality? And if so, then how would we discover who's right and who's wrong? What's the difference between Mother Teresa and Hitler? Is one of them really good? Is one of them really evil? In an objective sense, or is that just your opinion? It all comes down to something called purpose. The purpose. Think about this. Without purpose, there's no right way or wrong way to live. You know, when a football game is played, the only way that somebody can tell if a quarterback throwing a pick six is any worse than the quarterback throwing a touchdown is what? If you know the purpose of the game. Without purpose, you don't. The guy throwing a pick six is not really any worse than the guy throwing a touchdown. You need purpose. You got to know the purpose of the game. And you got to have purpose to have right, wrong, good, bad, or evil. Now on atheism, you're nothing more than a cosmic accident. There is no ultimate purpose in your life. Life is purposeless and meaningless on atheism. You're nothing but dust in the wind. However, think about this. If God exists and created humanity on purpose and for a specific purpose, then it logically follows that there are some objective facts about humanity, irrespective of the subjective opinions from humanity. It's all about purpose. That is to say, if Christianity is true, if it's true, then there are rules to the game of life. Now, if you choose to ignore these rules, that's another question. But the last time I checked, athletes who win championships are the ones who know the rules and the purpose of the game. So here's the question. What is the purpose of life? What's the purpose of life? Well, if Christianity is true, then we know the purpose of life. We know the rules of the game of life. Jesus made it clear when he summed up the entire law in 2 simple and easy to remember commands. You can sum it up like this. Number 1, love God first. And number 2, everybody love everybody. From your neighbors to even those who consider you to be an enemy. Everybody always love everybody. I mean, who doesn't want to live in a world like that? Who doesn't want Christianity to be true? Think about this. If everybody listened to and followed the commands of Jesus and everybody actually loved everybody all the time, who does not want to live in that kind of world? Why would you not want Christianity to be true? I don't get it. But Jesus even went on to give us some specifics about how to accomplish this, about what God's purpose for humanity was. Ultimately, it's about love, but then he told us how to love each other in certain aspects. Now, he even told us what marriage should look like, how to love your spouse, and actually who your spouse should be. Well, let me explain. A lot of people, just a side note here, a lot of people think that Jesus never spoke against things like homosexual marriage, but that's false. Because he did affirm God's model of marriage in Mark 10, 6 through 8. And it can be summed up in the following way. It's one man and one woman becoming one flesh for one lifetime. Jesus is saying that that's God's purpose for human marriage. You see, Jesus gave us the rules. It's the law above human law. So even if it's legal, that doesn't mean it's right. You see? And it's all logically grounded in the fact that God created humanity on purpose and for specific purposes. And so there are objective facts about humanity, irrespective of the subjective opinions from humanity. And the Bible says that God is love. And this makes sense as to why God created humanity for the objective purpose to love. You see, God's unchanging moral nature is the standard of how we measure good, bad, right, wrong, fair, or evil. It's God's nature. And his nature is love. And so things that are other than love, things that are not love, are objectively wrong. They're objectively bad. It's objectively evil. When you use the same ability to love in a backwards way, that's evil. And that's easy to remember because love spelled backwards is evil. All right, never been the best speller, but you get the point. You'll get the point, and you won't forget it. Now you're free to disagree with God about his purpose of your existence. You're free to disagree. You are free to miss the objective mark. But that's simply what it means to sin, to miss the mark. And those who miss the mark for eternity, those who choose to miss the mark for eternity, well, you get to have it your own way. Here's the bottom line. If there is no God, then the Nazis were not really wrong. in any objective sense. Just their opinion versus yours. If there is no God, then love is no better than rape. If there is no God, there are no such thing as human rights, like the Declaration of Independence makes clear. There's no objective or unalienable human rights. Atheism is un-American, by the way. Atheism cannot make sense of the Declaration of Independence. Christianity can. 4, if there is no God, the religious crusades were not wrong. Right? I hear people complaining about those all the time, that they were wrong. Well, not if atheism's true. And if there is no God, then tolerance is no better than intolerance. Think about that. And if there is no God, well, you can't complain about the problem of evil, because evil proves God does exist. Think about this. If God does not exist, then there's nothing that's objectively good, bad, right, wrong, fair, or evil. If somebody says, I'm an atheist because of the problem of evil, well, you've just provided the next premise that says evil exists, and therefore God exists. Right? So evil is like a hostile witness who turns on the prosecution in the courtroom of public opinion and turns against it. The atheist trots out evil to say, look, I'm an atheist because of the problem of evil. But then evil turns around as a hostile witness and says, ha-ha, God exists. Evil backfires on the atheist. C.S. Lewis realized this. As an atheist, he said that my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If there is no God, there is nothing that is just. But justice exists, right? Therefore, God exists.